once again to another edition of Quick Trivia with Mike. I'm your host and quizmaster, Mike Brever. We're seen weekly right here on channel 955 at various times over the weekend. It's that weekly quiz show where we ask you current trivia. Some of it is a little bit historical, some of it is contemporary. All of it, I hope, is fun. I hope you're all having a good time with it. As you all know, I was gone for 2 weeks on a little bit of a holiday break. I'd really like to thank Cooper Ledvina and Scott McFerrin for filling in for me. I think they did a great job, don't all of you? I know they had a lot of fun filling in. Typically, they're my behind-the-scenes people, the producer and my artistic director, who make this show what it is. I think they had a lot of fun filling in for me. So thanks, Cooper and Scott. You'll be filling in for me again when the opportunity arrives. Let's begin by taking a look at last week's 3 questions. Cooper was your host last week, so I'm going to be kind of filling in for him now as I give you the answers. He had 3 really disparate questions, a little bit of historical, a little bit of contemporary, a little bit of social trivia. But let's take a look at them, shall we? The first question I'm going to take a look at, Cooper told you a little bit about Marilyn Monroe, gave you a little bit about her history and her time in Hollywood, her acquaintances, etc. He asked you, however, what photograph was on the piano in Marilyn Monroe's home at the time of her death? Well, the answer to that comes from no less of a notable person than Shelley Winters. Marilyn Monroe was once roommates with actress Shelley Winters, who said that the two of them, to pass the time once, had made up a list of men they wanted to sleep with. Just for fun. There was no one under 50 on Marilyn Monroe's list. Shelley Winters found that kind of interesting. Maybe Marilyn Monroe had a father complex or whatever. Shelley Winters reported, though, that she never got to ask Marilyn Monroe before she died how many of her list she had actually achieved. But on her list was Albert Einstein. And after Marilyn's death, Shelley Winters noticed that there was a silver-framed photograph of him on her white piano. So that's the answer to the question. A silver-framed photograph of Albert Einstein sat on a white piano in Marilyn Monroe's home. Albert Einstein, the answer to question number 1. Question number 2, a little bit more of a historical question. Cooper went off on a bit of a fancy regarding Benjamin Franklin and some of his experiments. He asked you in particular what he had experimented with a turkey as a result of his efforts as a scientist. You know, the story is that Ben Franklin actually wanted the turkey as our national bird. Ben Franklin always said that that was grossly misrepresented. He didn't necessarily want the eagle. He found the eagle to be a dirty bird, a scavenger, if you will. And he found the turkey to be more of a noble bird. But he wasn't necessarily advocating for the turkey to be the national symbol. But be that as it may, Benjamin Franklin once tried to electrocute a turkey after bragging to a fellow scientist that his experiments with electricity could be put to use by killing and roasting a turkey via electrical shock. Franklin proposed to do just that for an audience. After several rounds of experiments, Franklin seemed to get the hang of it, but when the time came in 1750 for him to demonstrate what he had learned, Franklin ended up shocking himself rather than cooking the bird, and it left him temporarily numb and temporarily humiliated. Kind of an early microwave oven right out in the open there. Franklin, as you know, was the discoverer. You can't say he invented electricity, but he proved its existence, and you know the story of the kite and the key and all the rest of that. But that's the answer. He tried to cook a turkey using electricity in 1750. And unfortunately, he just left himself a little bit more humble for the experiment. Although, as you know, electricity is a part of cooking in our everyday life today, so clearly Franklin was on to something. The third question. Cooper talked to you about coffee, and he wanted to know what was something that Maxwell House proposed that was rather unique for coffee. Well, in 1923, nobody was really certain whether coffee was a bean or a fruit. Beans and legumes were not kosher, and so they were forbidden for Passover. The marketing guy who worked with Maxwell House, a gentleman by the name of Joseph Jacobs, persuaded Orthodox Rabbi Hirsch Cohn to classify coffee as a fruit. That, therefore, made it kosher. A few years later, Maxwell House produced its first Haggadah, a sort of Passover reader containing prayers and hymns, which is still distributed. It's the longest running content marketing play in American history. So there you have it. They invented a way for kosher to become coffee. And that was the answer to question number 3. Now, as you know, if 2 or more of you call in with your answers and get the same number of answers correct, we do have a tiebreaker. It's the bumper music on the show. I hope you listened when the show began. If not, pay close attention when the program ends today, because that bumper music is the tiebreaker. Identify that bumper music, and maybe you can enter the winner's circle for this coming week. The bumper music from last week that serves as the tiebreaker, The Devil Went Down to Georgia, a song made famous by the Charlie Daniels Band, country western hit that really put Charlie Daniels on the map in crossover music. It was a very big rock hit, as well as the fame that it enjoyed in country music as well. Charlie Daniels has been traveling and entertaining on that song for the remainder of his career. I think Devil Went Down to Georgia actually came out in the 1970s or the 1980s, but again, he's made a career out of it. And that was the bumper music. Who was the winner this past week? We had lots of people call in or email with their answers. 2 of you actually came up with the correct answers to all 4. Sandra Meyer and Teresa Sundberg, welcome back to the winner's circle yet again. I know we're all really happy for you, and we're excited that you're in the winner's circle once more. Your picture, as all of our winners do, will be on channel 955 for the rest of the week until next week's airing. What question stumped most of our readers, most of our players? It was, in fact, the picture in Marilyn Monroe's home. One person guessed it was Abraham Lincoln. Another person guessed that it was Cecil Benton. That was the question that stumped most of our players. So again, congratulations to Sandra and Teresa. You're going to see their face on 955 for the rest of the week. There you have it. That's last week's wrap-up.
You know, if you were to follow a busy doctor as he makes his daily round of calls, you'd find yourself having a mighty busy time keeping up with him. Time out for many men of medicine usually means just long enough to enjoy a cigarette. And because they know what a pleasure it is to smoke a mild, good-tasting cigarette, they're particular about the brand they choose. In a repeated national survey, doctors in all branches of medicine, doctors in all parts of the country were asked, "What cigarette do you smoke, doctor?" Once again, the brand named most was Camel. Yes, according to this repeated nationwide survey, more doctors smoke Camels than any other cigarette. Why not change to Camels for the next 30 days and see what a difference it makes in your smoking enjoyment? See how Camels agree with your throat. See how mild and good tasting a cigarette can be.
Where are we going now with our 3 new questions? Well, I really have to thank my wife, Mary Beth. She pointed out to me that this coming week will be the inauguration of the 46th President of the United States, Joseph Biden. She thought that questions about the inauguration would really be a nice touch given the timeliness of it with the festivities taking place next Wednesday. Well, I did take off on that theme, and it is the focal point, but it's not all of the questions. So let's get right into it, shall we? Let us take a look at the inauguration of the President of the United States. First of all, the inauguration is in fact the ceremony that marks the commencement of the new 4-year term of the President of the United States. The inauguration takes place for each new presidential term, even if the president is continuing in office for a second term. Since 1937, it has taken place at noon Eastern Standard Time on January 20th, the first day of the new term, unless, of course, it's on a Sunday, in which case, on January 20th, the swearing in is taking place in private at the White House, and the next day, maybe at the Capitol, but the next day, the festivities actually occur so that we don't interfere with Sunday religious services. January 20th is between 72 and 78 days after the presidential election. The recitation of the presidential oath of office is the only component in this ceremony mandated by the United States Constitution. In Article 2, Section 1, Clause 8, it referenced that. Though it is not a constitutional requirement, the Chief Justice typically administers the presidential oath of office. Since 1789, the oath has been administered at 58 scheduled public inaugurations by 15 Chief Justices, 1 Associate Justice, and 1 New York State Judge. Ironically, they did talk in this recitation about the inauguration and how even if it's a succeeding president from term 1 to term 2, you go ahead and you have a festive inauguration. It isn't really necessary when you transition from one president to another in the event of a crisis. If you remember the famous picture of Lyndon Johnson on Air Force One following the assassination of John F. Kennedy, his hand is raised, Jackie Kennedy is next to him. Johnson insisted on that because he thought it was a visible reference for the citizens that there was continuity in the United States following the assassination of the president. All was well with the world, the government continued, a new president was in place. But upon the assassination of a president, the vice president automatically becomes the new president. Since 1981, the inauguration of Ronald Reagan, the ceremony has been held at the west front of the United States Capitol facing the National Mall, with the iconic Washington Monument and distant Lincoln Memorial in the viewpoint. From 1829 through 1977, most swearing-in ceremonies have taken place on a platform over the steps of the Capitol's east portico. They've also been held inside the old Senate chamber, the chamber of the House of Representatives, and the Capitol Rotunda. You might remember the famous pictures of Abraham Lincoln at his swearing in. The dome was under construction at that time, but again, in spite of the fact that it was a wartime capital, held in public for everybody to see the continuity of government at that time. The first inauguration, that of George Washington, took place on April 30th, 1789. All subsequent regular inaugurations from 1793 until 1933 were held on March 4th. That, of course, changed to January 20th with the 1937 swearing in. Inauguration Day, while not a federal holiday, is observed as a holiday by federal employees who would normally be working in the Inauguration Day area. Clearly they can't work because of the throngs of people, so it's a working holiday. And they do in fact get paid for the day. Since 1901, the Joint Committee on Inaugural Ceremonies has been responsible for the planning and execution of the swearing-in ceremonies. Since 1953, it has hosted a luncheon at the U.S. Capitol for the new president, the vice president, and guests. 3 senators and 3 representatives make up the committee. And of course, after all of that, there's balls in the evening and all kinds of things. While all of that is going on, the White House staff are moving out the personal effects of the outgoing president and moving in the personal effects of the new president and his, or maybe someday her family, to the point where when the new president comes back, at the end of the day, it's like they've been there for years. The Capitol or the staff do a wonderful job. In addition to the public, the attendees at the inauguration generally include the Vice President, members of Congress, Supreme Court justices, high-ranking military officers, former presidents, Living Medal of Honor recipients, and other dignitaries. The outgoing president and vice president also customarily attend the ceremony. You know from the news reports, President Trump does not intend on attending. He will not be the first who has not attended. John Adams, John Quincy Adams, Andrew Johnson, Woodrow Wilson. These are presidents who did not attend for various reasons. One was holding a committee meeting at the time. Wilson was, of course, ill at the time. So not all did. That's a little bit about the history of presidential inaugurations. My question to you, it's a 4-part question, so put on your thinking caps, and I hope you get all 4 right. I'll give you partial credits, 25% of the answer for each one. Which was the first inauguration to be covered by telegraph? Which was the first inauguration to be photographed? Which was the first inauguration to be covered nationally by radio? And which was the first inauguration to be televised? That's a 4-part question. The first inauguration to be covered by telegraph, the first inauguration to be photographed, the first inauguration to be covered nationally by radio, and the first inauguration to be covered by television. There you have it. Question number 1, a 4-part question. I'll give you partial credit, 25% for each portion that you get right. Question number 2. We've already talked a little bit about this. The United States Capitol. The inauguration has taken place at the Capitol for decades now. Let's take a look a little bit at the history of the Capitol, shall we? The United States Capitol, often called the Capitol Building, is the meeting place of the United States Congress and the seat of the legislative branch of the United States federal government. It's located on Capitol Hill at the eastern end of the National Mall in Washington, D.C. Though no longer the geographic center of the federal district, the Capitol forms the origin point for the district's street numbering system and the district's 4 quadrants. The original building was completed in 1800. You all know that it was partially destroyed in 1814. The War of 1812, the burning of Washington. The White House was affected, the Capitol was affected. The building was fully restored within 5 years after the burning in 1814. The building was later enlarged with the addition of the massive dome. That's what I talked about in the inauguration of Abraham Lincoln. You can see the construction in the background, all during the Civil War. Lincoln thought it was really important to continue that construction during the war, to show the world that there was continuity in the United States and that we were moving forward. It was symbolic of the fact that the war was not going to detract from the great heritage and the great future of the United States of America. Like the principal buildings of the executive and the judicial branches, the Capitol is built in the neoclassical style and has a white exterior. Both its east and west elevations are formally referred to as fronts, though only the east front was intended for the reception of visitors and dignitaries. Prior to establishing the nation's capital in Washington, D.C., the United States Congress and its predecessors had met in Philadelphia and also in Washington. In Philadelphia, they met at Independence Hall. I'm sorry, I said Washington. They met in Philadelphia and New York City. In Philadelphia, they met in Independence Hall and for a while in Congress Hall. In New York City, they met in Federal Hall. The decision as to where to locate the Capitol was in fact contentious, but Alexander Hamilton helped broker a compromise in which the federal government would take on war debt incurred by the colonies during the American Revolutionary War in exchange for support from northern states for locating the Capitol along the Potomac River. As part of the legislation, Philadelphia was chosen as a temporary capital, and it did so for 10 years until December of 1800, when the capital was moved to Washington, D.C. Pierre Charles L'Enfant was given the task of creating the city plan for the new capital. L'Enfant chose Jenkins Hill as the site for Congress House with a grand avenue, now named Pennsylvania Avenue Northwest, connecting it with the President's House, now known as the White House, and a public space containing a broader Grand Avenue, now the National Mall, stretching westward to the Potomac River. So actually, all of that goes back to the original plan of Pierre Charles L'Enfant in 1800. Thomas Jefferson insisted the legislative building be called the Capitol, in contrast to Congress Hall. A challenge was put out to architects to come up with a design. There were 5 or 6 that were created. Some of them were just rather amateurish. America was not known for its architecture at that time, and we didn't really get a good design. A late entry, however, by amateur architect William Thornton was submitted on January 31st, 1793, and it was met with much grandeur, simplicity, and beauty by George Washington. That's how he described it. It was a plan of grandeur, simplicity, and beauty. It also received the praise of Thomas Jefferson. And if you got Washington and Jefferson on your side in that era, it was a done deal. Thornton was inspired by the east front of the Louvre, as well as the Paris Pantheon for the center portion of the design. Thornton's design was officially approved in a letter dated April 5th, 1793, from George Washington himself. Thornton served as the first architect and later the first superintendent of the United States Patent and Trademark Office. The original design of Thornton was modified by British American architects Benjamin Henry Latrobe Sr. and Charles Bulfinch. The current cast iron dome and the house's new southern extension and Senate northern wing were designed by Thomas Walter and August Schoenborn, a German immigrant in the 1850s, and were completed under the supervision of Edward Clark. The Senate wing was completed in 1800, the House of Representatives wing in 1811. Capitol held its first session of the United States Congress with both chambers in session on November 17, 1800. Ironically, and many people don't know this, but in the beginning, starting in 1800 when the Capitol was put in service, Capitol was used for Sunday religious services. as well as government functions. For several decades, Sundays, the Capitol was more busy than it was the rest of the week. The Speaker's podium in those days was used as the preacher's pulpit. When the Capitol was expanded in the 1850s, some of the construction labor was carried out by slaves who cut the logs, laid the stones, and baked the bricks. Originally, the plan was to import workers from Europe. However, there was a poor response to the recruitment effort, and African Americans, some freed, mostly enslaved, composed the majority of the workforce. Yet again, another example of things that we are dedicated and grateful to because of our African American predecessors. The Capitol Dome expansion more than doubled the length of the Capitol and dwarfed the original timber frame copper sheeted low dome, which was finished in 1818. The new dome stood 3 times the height of the original dome. It was not until 1984 that landscape designer Russell Page created a suitable setting for a large meadow, which has become the National Arboretum in Northeast Washington as the National Capitol Columns. On December 19, 1960, the Capitol was declared a National Historic Landmark by the National Park Service. My question to you has to do with capitals. We've now talked a lot about the capital of the United States. My question to you has to do with capitals, but not the capital of the United States. What is the oldest state house capital in continuous legislative use in the United States? The oldest state house capital in continuous legislative use here in the United States. So the oldest Capitol building of a state in the United States in continuous use. This also is a 2-part question. I'll give you half the question for each one. Looking at the cities that capitals of states or capital of the United States are located in. The city. What is the oldest capital in the United States? In other words, what city is the oldest city in the United States that houses a capital? So those are your 2 questions. Which state house has been in continuous use the longest? And what city is the oldest city in the United States that houses a capital? That's question number 2. I'll give you 50% for each of those. The third question today has to do with the flag of the United States. The flag of the United States of America, often referred to as the American flag or the U.S. flag, is the national flag of the United States. It consists of 13 equal horizontal stripes and with a blue rectangle, sometimes called the canton, however specifically referred to as the Union, bearing 50 small white 5-pointed stars. Nicknames for the flag include Stars and Stripes, Old Glory, and the Star-Spangled Banner. Speaking of the Star-Spangled Banner, you know that the song, which has become our national anthem, was written by Francis Scott Key on September 13th and 14th of 1814, when he sat on a ship in the Baltimore Harbor, War of 1812. The British were bombing Fort McHenry, and Fort McHenry stood in the morning, and Francis Scott Key knew that because the flag was flying over the fort. The flag has been modified 26 times since 1777. 26 times since 1777. Back in 1777, the flag was contemporaneously known as the Continental Colors. Continental Colors now refers to the very first design referred to as the first national flag. The flag actually closely resembles the British East India Company flag from that era. And Sir Charles Fawcett argued in 1937 that the company flag inspired the design. Both flags could have been easily constructed by adding white stripes to a British red ensign, one of the three maritime flags used throughout the British Empire at the time. We, of course, dispute that. But, of course, a lot of our heritage comes from the Brits, so maybe there is something to that. The first official U.S. flag flown during battle was on August 3rd, 1777 at Fort Schuyler, now known as Fort Stanwix, during the siege of Fort Stanwix. Massachusetts reinforcements brought news of the adoption by Congress of the official flag to Fort Schuyler. Soldiers cut up their shirts to make the white stripes. Scarlet material to form the red was secured from red flannel petticoats of officers' wives, while material for the blue union was secured from Captain Abraham Swartwood's blue cloth coat. My apologies to Captain Abraham for ruining his last name, but that's what you get. A voucher is extant that Captain Swartwood of Dutchess County was paid by Congress for his coat to make the flag. Francis Hopkinson of New Jersey, a naval flag designer and signer of the Declaration of Independence, designed the flag in 1777 while he was chairman of the Continental Navy Board's Middle Department. Sometime between his appointment to that position in November 1776 and the time the flag resolution was adopted in June 77. Chris, you all know the story about Betsy Ross sewing the first flag, etc., etc. That's a little bit about the history of our flag. You all know what an important part of our heritage it is now. It is flown over all government buildings to honor the passing of someone. It's flown at half-staff. It's used at military funerals. It really is a symbol of our country that is at the heart of all that we like to believe that we stand for. My question to you, we all know that the flag currently has 50 stars on a blue background. It also has 13 stripes, red and white, totaling 13. The 50 stars represent the 50 current United States. The 13 stripes represent the 13 original American colonies. The stripes, however, in the flag did not always represent the 13 colonies. When and why did the stripes on the American flag not represent the 13 colonies? That is question number 3. There you have it, folks. Our quiz for this week on Quick Trivia with Mike. Put on your thinking caps. A lot of patriotic questions today, focused around the fact that we have the inauguration of President Joseph Biden coming up on Wednesday. I hope you find these challenging and you have some fun with it. How do you win? How do you get in the winner's circle just like Teresa Sundberg and Sandra Meyer did this week? Get your answers to me by noon on Monday. Lots of ways to do that. Call my desk at 963-8425 or email me at mbrever@eastcastleplace.com. I know I gave those to you real fast. Call the front desk. They'll give you my email address. They'll also give you my phone number. You could also write your answers on a piece of paper, slide them under my office door, or ask the front desk to put them in my mailbox. That's our show for this week. I'd really like to thank the management of ECTV Channel 955, our president, Tyler Gudex, our executive producer, Laura Wengler, my producer and cameraman, Scott McFerrin, and of course my artistic director and historical advisor, Cooper Ledvina. Without them, anything that you like about Quick Trivia with Mike probably wouldn't take place. There you have it. That's our show for this week. Thanks for tuning in and inviting me into your home. I always have a good time doing this. I hope you do too. I'm your host and the quiz master, Mike Brever. Until I see you all next week, so long, and I ask you all to please be safe, be smart, and be patient. We will all be together again soon enough to enjoy that wonderful East Castle Place hospitality. So long, everybody.